Uh, Hopefully you guys can hear me okay, and hopefully we have fun. So we'll try and do this every Friday about noon, and we'll just kind of wing it and see what happens. I don't really know how this is going to go, but I appreciate everybody helping out and being part of this, and it should be a lot of fun. First question comes in from Scott. He says, looking at this draft and its depth at the power forward position got me thinking, are the Jazz sold on Favors as being their guy long term? I would say unquestionably. In terms of long term, it's hard to say because Derek Favors hasn't really started for the Jazz for an extended period. He was buried in New Jersey for a long time before the Carmelo Anthony trade and then as part of the Darren Williams trade. But anytime Favors has gotten in the game and received legitimate minutes for the Jazz, he's always proved himself. He continues to improve on the offensive end. He continues to improve on the defensive end. And at some point, sooner than later, the Jazz are going to have to make a decision, Derek Favors or Paul Millsap. What we've seen lately that's interesting is Millsap playing the 3, Favors at the 4, Jefferson at the 5. But I've said this 100 times this season on 97.5 The Zone, and the Salt Lake Tribune, on and on and on. It's really hard in the modern NBA, especially if you're a small market team, and with the new CBA, to keep Al Jefferson, Derek Favors, Enes Kanter, and Paul Millsap on your team. And the bigger part of that is that Millsap and Jefferson, their contracts expire at the end of next season. So they're very valuable trade pieces. And it's rough because Jefferson has been their average leading scorer and rebounder this year. Derek Favors is playing very well. Enes Kanter, when he gets in, plays well. Paul Millsap, I think, is again right now their most valuable player for the second consecutive season. But you can't keep all those guys on your team because at some point Favors and Kanter are going to want to start. Let's see. Second question. Coming in from New VA, I would think that Favors is more long-term for the Jazz than Millsap. I would totally agree with that, and I was just kind of talking about that situation. It's going to be interesting tonight. Right now, Paul Millsap is dealing with a right wrist sprain. It was really bad a day ago. The pain's gone down a little. He's doubtful against the Hornets. Just came back from Jazz shoot-around. Ty hopes that Paul is going to be able to play. It doesn't sound like it, though. I'd never put it past Paul Millsap. I think he can always get on the court, and Ty talked about it, and I've said it numerous times. If Paul Millsap can play, Paul Millsap's going to play for the Utah Jazz. That's just the type of guy he is. He's an absolute warrior. He's played through so many injuries, but it's a shooting wrist. It's a really delicate situation. The last thing that you want to do if you're Paul Millsap is hurt yourself over the long term or even re-injure it tonight, even if you're trying to kind of be a decoy and take it easy and just help out on defense and give the team 20 minutes. The second you have to post somebody up, go for a rebound, go for a loose ball, your instincts are going to kick in. Paul's been doing this his whole life. The last thing the Jazz can afford is to have Paul Millsap re-injure that wrist, especially when they're fighting for the playoffs. So I would not be surprised if Paul Millsap sits out tonight, maybe even sits out the Grizzlies game Saturday in Memphis because that's a back-to-back situation. And so we're going to see Derek Favors potentially again get starter minutes for the Jazz, and I wrote about it a couple days ago. Derek Favors is becoming synonymous with double-double. I mean, if he gets in the game and he plays 20 minutes, usually you're seeing at least a 10-10 out of that guy. His ceiling is so high. He has so much potential. He continues to work on his game. He's still not very polished, but long-term, there's no way around it. Derek Favors right now is the answer for the Jazz at power forward. He can play center. And you're looking at a situation, ideally, I think maybe at the end of next season. It depends how things play out, but definitely the start, I think, would be of 2013-14, basically just a year and 2 months from now, to where Paul Millsap and Al Jefferson most likely are not on this team, and Derek Favors and Enes Kanter are their starting 4 and 5. All right, so I'm just waiting for a few more questions to come in. Laura asks, who are your 3 MVPs for the Jazz this year? That's a great question. Number 1, I was just talking about it. I'm going to go with Paul Millsap. I think up until about 2 weeks ago, Al Jefferson was the guy Jefferson has really taken a step forward in his career. He talked about a week ago, 10 days ago, he feels like he's entered the prime of his career, that 3 to 5 year era to where he's at his best. And I would agree with him, but teams are able to contain Jefferson at times. If you're Serge Ibaka, if you're just any guy who's taller than Jefferson, bigger than him, athletic in the post position, Jefferson can be contained and at times shut down. Paul Millsap, from day one, he's just been there for the Jazz, and while Jefferson's numbers are a little better in terms of rebounds, in terms of scoring, if you look at efficiency, if you look at what Paul brings to the Jazz, his versatility, on and on and on, his ability to play through injuries, not that Jefferson hasn't. Jefferson has really stepped up this season. Very impressive on the court, off the court, great in the locker room. Really great guy for this team, and I think he's finally this season understood, what he needs to do to be the best he can be for the Utah Jazz. But my MVP, as of right now, if I'm casting a vote, is Paul Millsap. Number 2, Al Jefferson, and then number 3, Gordon Hayward. And I just can't say enough about Gordon Hayward, his development, where he's at in his career, still being 22 years old. And we saw that just 2 nights ago. His game and his performance, 29 points against Houston. That's a game on paper going into it. You do not think the Utah Jazz are going to win, and they didn't steal that game. They completely dominated that game from the opening tip, and much of that credit goes to Gordon Hayward. All right, from Ivan, that's a tough question. From what I'm familiar with, which of the current Jazz players will not be returning next season? We're going to have to kind of watch this thing play out. Number 1, draft picks. What happens with the draft? We still don't know how the lottery balls are going to fall. More importantly, we still don't know what type of picks the Jazz are going to have, if any, in the first round. And just because they don't have one after the lottery selected, and once the playoffs come into play, and let's say the Jazz's pick that's right now, owned by Golden State goes to Golden State. Let's say the Jazz make the playoffs, and it's a situation where the Jazz's first-round pick goes to Minnesota, and let's just say that, after the lottery balls fall, the Jazz don't have a first-round pick. That doesn't mean that they can't get a first-round pick. As I just talked about, they have very tradable pieces. Devin Harris, Paul Millsap, Al Jefferson. You have Raja Bell. You have a number of players. At the start of the season, 4 of their 5 starters had a year and a half left on their contracts. We're at the point where they basically are on the verge of having expiring contracts. So the Jazz can always trade in that situation to get a draft pick back. Right now, I don't have all the numbers in front of me, but Devin Harris, Raja Bell, Al Jefferson, Paul Millsap, barring something that's going to happen in the future, they'll be back for the Jazz at least at the start of next season. They could be traded, though, during the lead up to the draft, or even during that. There's always a 1 to 2 week window during training camp where teams start making trades again. And then you have to kind of look at other people. It's hard to say with somebody like Jeremy Evans. Evans is in the last year of his deal. He's a second-round pick. He hasn't played very much for the Jazz, and unfortunately, when he got in just a couple games ago, he twisted his ankle, and he's doubtful tonight against the Hornets in New Orleans, and technically doubtful against the Grizzlies on Saturday. Damari Carroll, I believe, is, he was just a one-year deal. Obviously, Blake Ahern's a 10-day contract. I've been told that Jamal Tinsley's contract goes through Summer League. It's never been fully explained, and we'll kind of have to see how that plays out. I think technically it was a one-year deal with Tinsley, but I was told by somebody who knows what they're talking about recently, and they made a point to say this: hey, look, the Jazz have him through Summer League. Summer League follows the draft, so we're going to have to see how that plays out. Earl Watson still has a year left on his contract. So in terms of which of the current Jazz players will not be returning next season, we're just going to have to kind of see how that plays out. I think everybody's familiar with who has expiring contracts, who has a year left, who has 2 years left. The interesting thing, big picture, is that GM Kevin O'Connor has done a really, really good job getting this team to the point where in about 2 years there won't be anybody under contract except for the young guys, Enes Kanter, Derek Favors, Alec Burks, and Gordon Hayward. And that's why I continue to say, hey, it's good for the Jazz right now. that they're fighting for the playoffs. If they make the playoffs, that's awesome. It's going to be a total testament to this team. O'Connor, President Randy Rigby, owner Greg Miller, Coach Tyrone Corbin, his assistants, on and on and on. But it's going to become so interesting because we just don't know how this team's going to look, let alone after this summer, but especially in 2 years. So I think a lot of the things that are working for the Jazz right now, they're going to have to kind of reinvent. And that's why it's important they continue to develop these young guys. Comment coming in from Brian with a Y. What will the Jazz do with Raja this offseason? Great question, very hard answer. There's no way around it. It just has not worked with Raja Bell and the Utah Jazz. Raja's tried to make it work. The Jazz have tried to make it work. I think, I know a lot of fans and Salt Lake Tribune readers have been frustrated. Before Raja's injury, they were frustrated that he was still in the starting lineup. I understand where that frustration is coming from. I've said all along, Ty said it, the Jazz believe it. If Raja is healthy and it's the right situation and he's motivated, Raja is still an asset for this team. Now, the flip side of that is I don't know that many teams in the NBA, if any, that Raja Bell would be your starting shooting guard for. And that's not a knock on Raja at all. That's just where he's at in his career, where the NBA's at. But Raja, if he can stick with the Jazz, he's in excellent shape. For him being 35 years old, his conditioning is unreal. He's still a good defender. He's still a good three-point shooter. He actually improved his three-point shooting this year. Before he was starting to deal with a groin and the knee injury, Raja had become the Jazz's best three-point shooter, which is why they signed him 2 summers ago. I really do think that it could work out still with Raja and the Jazz. They basically need to take the summer off, clean slate, come back, and then I think Raja's got to accept, and the Jazz have to accept it only works if he comes off the bench. And maybe he's your 8th guy, or he plays 10 minutes and he's a lockdown type of defender and he can hit a couple threes. And if he can do that for you in the regular season or in the postseason, that's a huge asset. If Raja Bell is your 8th or 9th best player, that being said, he wants to play more minutes. And he's not complaining, but in his head, and I understand where he's coming from, he still thinks he should be playing about 20 minutes a game, and he might do that. Let's say if he was on Charlotte, he wouldn't start, but he could be your backup shooting guard in Charlotte or a lesser team. It's just hard for the Jazz because you have C.J. Miles, you have Gordon Hayward, you have Alec Burks, and I would not be surprised at all if during the draft the Jazz target another shooting guard or try and sign someone through free agency or just add a shooting guard that way. So in terms of what the Jazz and Raja are going to do during the offseason, we're just going to have to see this thing play out. I think out of all the situations the Jazz are dealing with, predicting whether Raja Bell is going to return to the Jazz this summer and be on the team in 2012-13 is one of the hardest things to predict. That comment came in from Michael K. as well. What will the Jazz do about Raja? Is he on the team next year? And I just said, we're going to have to find out. All right, coming in next from somebody named Guest. That's a great name. Do you think we are at all worried about losing both of our draft picks? I don't think so. I totally understand many of the fans, Salt Lake Tribune readers, are very worried about it, and it is a really interesting, hard to kind of watch happen situation to where, there's so many moving pieces with the Jazz right now. It looks good with the record 3 games above 500. Most people didn't think they'd be fighting for the playoffs. The Jazz are fighting for the playoffs, and if they make the playoffs, there's nothing bad about that. I mean, that's a good thing, and it's a great credit to this team and the organization to be able to trade someone like Darren Williams in a lockout season. When you're relying on guys like Alec Burks, Enes Kanter, Derek Favors, Gordon Hayward, cast-offs like Damari Carroll, Jamal Tinsley, on and on and on. To be able to get in the playoffs, that's great. But at the same time, you need draft picks because we're seeing a transition right now, or era-wise, with the Utah Jazz. Paul Millsap, Al Jefferson, and Devin Harris, technically, not even just statistically, but NBA-wise, contract-wise, name-wise, that's the Jazz's big 3. All 3 of them going into next season will have expiring contracts, which I've been talking about. So the thing is, if you don't keep draft picks coming in, then all of a sudden you have to rely on one of 2 things, trades or free agency. the Jazz can trade, and that's where their strongest pieces are right now, and there's a reason Kevin O'Connor hasn't pulled the trigger on any of those guys or using the trade exception yet. But at the same time, you never know what's going to happen with a trade, and it's hard to trade for a star unless there's something wrong with him. LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, Kevin Durant, they're not made available in true trades, and there's an obvious reason why. But point being, in that situation, usually if you're getting a trade, somebody is they want to win that trade, and so you're either going to get draft picks back, which the Jazz aren't going to do in that trade situation when you're trying to upgrade your team immediately, or you're going to have to rely on free agency. And it's Salt Lake's a great place to play once you buy into it, and if you're into it. But you don't see the top 5 to 10 free agents every year putting Salt Lake City and the Utah Jazz at the top of their list. There's just no way around it. You can get good guys. It's hard to get great guys as free agency to come to your team unless you have core young building pieces, Gordon Hayward, Derek Favors, Alec Burks, Enes Kanter. Maybe you have a draft pick in this type of draft, and even if you don't get that through the playoff situation in Golden State and Minnesota, if you can maybe trade one of your main movable pieces, Harris, Millsap, or Jefferson, to move high up in the draft, if you can build a young core, then the Jazz are set up very, very well in 2 seasons for free agency, to where basically, I was just talking about this, but they hardly have anybody under contract anymore, so we're just going to have to watch this thing play out. And it's a really interesting situation, kind of watching the Jazz evolve, because as good as things have been this season, great locker room, they're making progress on the court, love what Gordon Hayward, Derek Favors, Alec Burks, and Enes Kanter have brought. There's so much unpredictable about this team in the next 2 years. Coming in from Ryan, do you think we have any interest in Damian Lillard? The Jazz do. No one's going to go on the record and say it. The Jazz have scouted Damian Lillard, and they like Damian Lillard. It goes back to, though, are they going to have draft picks in the first round? Right now, we don't know that. Their pick that they could have from Golden State is top 7 protected. Golden State's not that good right now, and I would not be surprised at all if Golden State continues to lose. Their schedule actually only gets rougher toward the end of this season. We have about 2 weeks to go. Obviously, they just lost to Dallas last night. Are they tanking? Aren't they tanking? I don't think technically they're tanking, but they're just not very good, and it's going to be hard for Golden State to stay out of that 1 through 7 and not get its pit back. And then the flip with the Jazz making the playoffs is, which we've talked about already, if the Jazz make the playoffs, their pick goes to Minnesota as part of the Al Jefferson deal. So if you don't have a first-round pick, there's no way you get Damian Lillard unless you trade back to get a pick. And as I've been talking about, the Jazz can very well do that, and I would not put it past the team to do that, especially when you have Devin Harris, Al Jefferson, Paul Millsap, even Raja Bell to move. It could happen. We're just going to have to see. And, this tonight is going to be fascinating with the Hornets game, the Grizzlies game, the last week, 10 days of this season, kind of playing this thing out if the Jazz make the playoffs. But I think all of that is almost going to pale in comparison to what happens this summer with the draft and free agency, and then seeing, who, if anybody, do the Jazz move to kind of move the organization forward into the next era, which they haven't really begun yet, because they're still relying on guys, Jefferson, Millsap, Harris, who are about to have expiring contracts. Michael K. asks, what are your odds the Jazz will make the playoffs, as well as the odds we keep the Golden State pick? Everybody wants to know about the draft picks, and you know what? You guys are totally right, because as I've been talking about, this is going to determine the Jazz's future more than, edging into the playoffs this year. Big picture, this is what's important. I think the Jazz are going to make the playoffs. I've been saying that for the last 2 or 3 weeks. Initially in the season, early in the season, I wanted to see what this team did during the trade deadline. They had 2, big decisions to make. Number 1, do we pull the trigger now and trade someone like Harris, Jefferson, Millsap, and start to go young a little more? But the Jazz didn't do that because they started very well for a number of reasons. A, the team played well to start the season. B, its schedule was a cupcake schedule, and they were playing everything at home. They had their 2-month road test. They didn't, excel, but they held their own. I believe they went 16-19 in February and March, playing, I think, 22 of 34 games on the road. They beat teams like Oklahoma City, Miami, the Lakers on the road that I don't think anybody at the start of the season or even in mid-January thought that the Jazz would do. And so it's a situation now where they're fighting for the playoffs, and I do think that the Jazz will make the playoffs. The tough thing right now is looking at Paul Millsap. Paul Millsap's doubtful tonight against the New Orleans Hornets. He's got a sprained right wrist. And while he's feeling a little better, and I know there's no question if Paul Millsap can play, he's going to play. But if they don't have Paul Millsap, they're down to 9 active players, one of which is DeMarre Carroll, who's been playing fairly well, but, he wasn't on a team not too long ago, and Blake Ahern hadn't played in 3 weeks, and he started his entire season and spent his entire season in the D-League. So, it's rough if you lose Millsap. I think on paper, I think with what the Jazz have accomplished this season, if you look at the schedules for teams like Phoenix, Denver, Houston, I think the Jazz will make the playoffs, but when I was saying that yesterday, that was contingent on Paul Millsap playing, and then it came out a little later that Millsap's day-to-day and that he was dealing with a lot of pain in his wrist. If Paul can't play against Houston and can't play against the Grizzlies, and it even takes him a while to work back into game shape, then you're flipping a coin. I still think when you have Jefferson, Harris, Gordon Hayward, Derek Favors, and the Jazz's very favorable home schedule at the end of the season where they play 4 or 5 games at home. You look at the fact that out of their last 7 games, 2 are against the Blazers. LaMarcus Aldridge, their all-star forward, is out for the season with upcoming surgery. Orlando right now, it's still a little in the future, but Dwight Howard continues to deal with back spasms. So if you put all that together, the Jazz should make the playoffs, but if they lose Millsap, it gets even rougher. And then momentum is a really, it's a great thing, but it's a hard thing to predict. And, if Millsap can't play tonight against New Orleans, let's say, God forbid, the Jazz lose to the Hornets again on the road, that Grizzly game going into it was going to be tough. If you don't have Millsap, it's even tougher. So it's getting harder to predict, and what I felt like a week ago was almost a certainty because of how other teams were playing, how other teams' schedules were structured. I think right now, I still think the Jazz will make the playoffs, but a lot hinges on Millsap's health. And I think there was another part to that question. Odds keeping the Golden State pick. Right now, I don't think it's going to happen. I was just talking about this. Golden State's horrible. There's no way around it. They actually came back a little against Dallas last night. I watched the parts of that game, but every time I said, hey, I'll check back in, Dallas was up by 18 or whatever. So, I don't think that sorry, I'm laughing. There's an upcoming question that was pretty funny that I just caught. But I don't think Golden State is, going to move up in the standings. They're going to, 99% keep falling down. There's just nobody on that team right now. If you're counting on Nate Robinson to be your guy, that's a little rough. I like Klay Thompson, but just a weird time for that organization. It's going to be very hard for Golden State not to keep its pick. And as I'm sure anybody who's in this chat right now probably knows, because you're all awesome, hardcore Jazz fans, it's top 7 protected. So basically, after the lottery goes through, if Golden State has Golden State will get into the lottery. And then the lottery chances are based off your record, and it's really complicated, and then the ping pong balls fall. But if Golden State picks 1 through 7, it keeps its pick. All right, coming in from Peter J. Novak. Brian, don't you think you started your playoff beard a little prematurely? Not at all, sir. This is in honor of the lockout. It's not really. I get real busy, and the last thing I tend to remember to do or care to do, especially when I'm on the road, because living the road beat life, is shave. And so honestly, I'll not have to get too personal, but I'll have a beard. I don't know, 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, 10 times a year, and sometimes it'll get to about this, and then it goes away. And then it'll come back, and then it goes away, but it's totally random, and I never do any of that grooming stuff or whatever people do. That's it. And I'm talking about my beard too much, which I don't really care about. But it was funny question, Peter. No, so it's not a playoff beard at all, because, we don't know if the Jazz make the playoffs, but it's it's an honor of the lockout beard, if that makes any sense. All right, and just so everybody's seeing this, I'm sure you're seeing it on the live chat, and this is the first time we've done this, so I'm kind of winging it, but it's going well already. Questions are kind of coming in, and the Tribune is not moderating them, so to speak, but just letting them filter in so I can answer everybody's questions, and it just doesn't pile up. Vin asked, any new updates on Millsap for tonight? Just got back from shoot-around. Paul is wearing a brace. He walked through shoot-around. He did not shoot through shoot-around, which is the more important thing. It's improved a little, but there's still pain there, and it's a rough situation. A, it's a shooting wrist. B, if you go for a loose ball, if you go for a rebound, if you're being super careful and someone backs into you and you tweak that thing again, I mean, then how much time are you going to miss? So I've been talking to people who know kind of the situation and some more things that I can't report right now because of the delicacy of it. But safe to say, there's a lot of thought going into whether Paul Millsap will play, not just tonight, but against the Grizzlies. If Paul can play, Paul's going to play. I've never covered somebody who's more of a warrior, who's willing to play through injuries as much as he has. But, it's your shooting wrist. You're fighting for the playoffs. Is it worth possibly re-injuring it or just not even being useful against the Hornets, almost being a liability, which Paul talked about, and maybe instead sitting out for 1 to 2 more games? They have a back-to-back, New Orleans and Memphis, and then, you're healthy for the last 5 games of the season, 4 of which are at home, 2 of which are against a Blazers team without LaMarcus Aldridge, and that's just become a mess all of a sudden. So I'm interested to see what the Jazz do. My gut, if I'm, betting a penny, I don't think Millsap will play, and I actually would not be surprised if Millsap did not play against the Grizzlies, but we're just going to have to watch this thing play out, and we'll have an update. Say it's 1:30 New Orleans time. We'll have an update in about 4 hours. Before I forget, everything, I'm sure you know, but everything's up at TribJazz on Twitter, and you can also find me on Facebook and Google. All right, Peter, who had the awesome beard question, comes back. Would Ty ever pull a Popovich and go all in on tonight's New Orleans game with minutes and then throw in the towel on tomorrow's game at Memphis? Yeah, I think Ty is totally going to do that. I think that Ty is going to one-up Popovich. He's basically going to play Blake Ahern, Carroll, Cantor, and then it'll actually be the coaches. No, I don't think Ty's going to do that. The Spurs have the luxury of doing that. Funny question, by the way, but the Spurs have the luxury of doing that because they're so deep. The Jazz can't do that, as we all know, because they're down right now, technically, to 9 active players. So they couldn't even run a second unit out there. But funny questions. Comment from Marshall Johnson. How are things in the locker room? Are the players behind Ty? Good question. Things are really good in the locker room right now. And they honestly have been all season. It's been blown out of proportion a little about the Jazz's locker room last year. It was never bad. It was never horrible. It was never great. It was just a weird dynamic. You had some guys who had been together for a very, very long time. Ronnie Price, C.J. Miles, Paul Millsap, Darren Williams. Then you had guys like Vasinko, who were basically on their own planet. You had guys like Francisco Elson, who were cool and respected, but very quiet, kind of kept to themselves. Raja was kind of finding his way. He had rejoined the team. Gordon and Jeremy were rookies at the time. So it was just a lot of different pieces. And then when the team started to lose, it just got rough. And then you had the Darren situation and the Sloan situation. And I could spend the next 30 minutes talking about it, and I won't, to save everybody. But and I'll talk about it more maybe down the road, and before I lose my train of thought, I will try and open up more on these chats and give you guys some insider stuff I sometimes can't get into the paper or talk about when I go on 97.5 FM The Zone. But point being, it got bad last year, but it was never horrible. I mean, you didn't have crazy fights all the time, and Jerry and Darren went at it, but it wasn't like some of these bad professional sports locker rooms. And and I've been in some really bad ones before, and there are teams where their locker room is just a mess because guys have egos and entourages and they're prima donnas. And the Jazz, that's not how this organization works. But it's from training camp, it's been much, much better this season, to where you had guys like Jamal Tinsley, who he could have complained. You know, I mean, Jamal Tinsley has proven he can still not just play in this league. I mean, Jamal Tinsley can start for you in this league. He never complained. He just ran, which I wrote about today. You know, he cheered on the bench. He was waving towels. He was patting guys on the butt. He was mentoring Enes Kanter. He was doing all the right things. I mean, he's basically a player coach for this team. And even the small situations they had, like Raja Bell, which blew up at times. You know, Raja had been dealing with his stuff with the Jazz last season, so that really wasn't anything new. It was just, you know, dramatic for 1 or 2 days, and then the team and players kind of moved on. The Jazz's locker room has been amazing this season in the sense of, and I've talked to guys about this and I've written about this, it's a rarity in pro sports to have a situation where you have, you know, Jamal Tinsley, Earl Watson, Raja Bell, you have vets who are 32, 33, 35 years old, and they don't just tolerate the young guys, they love the young guys. I mean, Jamal Tinsley, and it's like the odd couple, but Jamal Tinsley, more than Al Jefferson, has turned into Enes Kanter's mentor. Now, I don't mean on the court in the sense of post moves and footwork. I mean just kind of, you know, there's so much more that you learn in the NBA as a player. In terms of, you know, just how to live your life, road life, you know, where to eat, how to act, a lot of that stuff. That stuff sometimes is as important to someone's development, big picture, than their footwork and the post. Now, obviously, you know, if you got Dwight Howard's talent, you can be a bit of a goofball, for lack of for a nice term, and still, you know, be Dwight Howard. You can still put up those numbers and be an absolute freaking goofball and a joke. But, you know, Enes Kanter learning with Jamal Tinsley, Alec Burks learning with Raja Bell, Earl Watson hanging out with Burks and Evans and Hayward. You don't see that in pro sports, and I've written about it a lot at the Tribune, in my stories. I've talked about it a lot on the radio. I've blogged about it. I've tweeted about it. But it's worth talking about, and it's a great question because it's just a really, really interesting, unique situation. These guys make millions of dollars. Some make $14 million a year. They technically don't have to be cool. You know, I mean, they technically don't have to hang out with the young guys. They go out of their way to do it, and it says a lot about this team and the organization and the players that not just Kevin O'Connor, but Kevin O'Connor, the scouting department, the assistant coaches, Tyrone Corbin, a lot of the guys whose names people don't really know, they work hundreds of hours throughout the year to find the right fit, and the Jazz just did a really, really great job piecing this team together, especially for a lockout season. All right, hopefully I'm not falling back on the questions. Let's see. Why isn't Kanter getting more playing time? You know, that's a good question. I think that Enes Kanter needs more playing time. There's no way around it. If I'm not going to say if I was a GM, but if you're a GM in this league, I think about half the GMs in this league, half the head coaches in this league would have Enes Kanter playing more minutes in an ideal situation. I mean, if Enes Kanter was playing on the Bobcats, if he was playing on Sacramento, if he was playing for Golden State, for crying out loud, he'd be getting 25 to 35 minutes a game. You've got Al Jefferson, and I've talked about this, you know, so many times this year, especially with Tribune columnist Gordon Monson, who is, you know, in a good way, obsessed with Derek Favors getting more minutes, and I totally agree and understand where Gordon Monson is coming from, and he has a totally legitimate point. It's just you can't get Enes Kanter that many minutes as long as you've got Al Jefferson. And you can't get Derek Favors 30 to 35 minutes a game as long as you've got Paul Millsap there. So it's just a situation where the minutes aren't going to get better for Favors and Kanter, especially over an 82-game season where we're not, you know, dealing with crazy off-the-wall injuries, until these guys get moved. And they either will play out their contracts. Out of Jefferson and Millsap, I think the more likely to re-sign with Utah is Millsap. I still think that's going to be very, very hard to do. Millsap, I believe, will try and look for some type of extension this summer, I'll be surprised if he gets it. And that's not a knock on Millsap at all. That's just a situation where the Jazz have to think long term. And I think on the free agent market, Paul Millsap is going to ask for and deserve 5 years, $50 million. 5 years times 12 is $60 million. Do you want to pay that to somebody when right now Derek Favors could be your starting four? Now you can slide Millsap to 3, and he's played better there, but it's not the long-term answer. I like Millsap at the 3. I wrote about it at the end of last season and kind of kicked that thing off. It's a doable thing, but you're going to be a liability against the best teams. You can't have Paul Millsap defending Kevin Durant. It just doesn't work. You can have Gordon Hayward, but then Gordon Hayward is your 3, and then you need a 2. So it starts to be dominoes, and that's why I think it's going to be very, very hard for the Jazz to keep Millsap and Jefferson around, partly because of the contract situations, partly because the readers are noticing it, the fans are noticing it. Favors needs minutes, Kanter needs minutes, and they're going to need them. They're going to need more sooner than later. All right, so let's see. I'm not. It's hard to tell how many questions are coming in. Like, I'm seeing them come through, but I don't know if there's 50 piled up. So I'm going to try and make these a little quicker. And if there's dead space, I'll start talking longer again, which is what I was doing to begin with. But we'll kind of get the flow of this thing. It's the first time doing it. We're going to be doing it a ton more, probably every Friday about noon at sltrib.com. I'll always give the updates at TribJazz on Twitter, and I'll try and answer everybody's questions. Comment from Jeremy: why doesn't the big 3, Jefferson, Favors, Millsap, start? Paul has proved long-term he can play the 3. That would be one scenario we could keep all of our bigs long-term. It's a really great question, but, and I just talked about this, but this is why it's really delicate, because it's a good question, but Kanter's name isn't mentioned in that question. You don't draft the number 3 guy who probably would have been number 1 overall if he had just played a year at Kentucky, who's 19 years old, who's way, way ahead of schedule. I mean, when Kanter was drafted, I talked to 50 people about Kanter before the draft. At best, he was a project, and there were a lot of question marks about Enes Kanter, and, his footwork has improved, his defense has improved, his offense has improved, his confidence has skyrocketed. He's smoother, he's a bull, he's more aggressive. He understands, already kind of, the strengths of his game, and he hasn't even shown off his outside shot. Enes Kanter has got an 18-footer that is deadly. He shoots it pregame, he shoots it during practice. It's what put him on NBA, the NBA world stage a couple years ago during the Hoop Summit. He just hasn't shot it thus far because, A, he's getting in 10 minutes, so the last thing you're going to do, especially on the Jazz, is go in and pop 18-footers. You'll end up on the bench in 30 seconds. B, there has been a concerted effort to say, hey, this guy's 19, we've got him for 2, 3, 4 more years. Let's get his, low post game locked in. Let's have him figure out defense. And it's a credit to Kanter and his camp and the Jazz that they understood, let's build something here, and let's just not turn another big into this kind of guy who does like 5 things sort of well, but never has a true strength. Enes Kanter has the potential, I think unquestionably, to develop into one of the premier centers in this league in about 2 to 3 years if he continues to make progress. But, why doesn't the big 3 start? Well, the big 3 doesn't start because it just doesn't work. Kanter is going to start, so that doesn't, at some point, so that doesn't answer, allowing to keep all of your bigs long term. B, as I just talked about, Millsap has continued to improve. I'll say it 1,000 times. This isn't any knock on Paul Millsap at all. He's just not a 3 in this league. He can play the 3. It can be a mismatch advantage. It's worked well at times. It also hasn't worked well at times, and it really depends who you're playing. And, any coach in the NBA is going to say, ideally, while everyone wants to say starters don't matter and it matters who finishes, starters matter. I mean, there's a reason that LeBron James or Dwayne Wade or Kevin Durant starts. And I know that's obvious, but my point there is, you want to set the tone from jump ball. You want to set the tone at the start of the 3rd quarter. You can't start long-term Paul Millsap at the 3 unless he goes into the summer being told he is your 3, which he wasn't last summer, and that was part of the problem. you can't make that move unless it's set in stone. I mean, you can't fluctuate your starting lineup every single night. Right now, the Jazz are best with Hayward either at the 2 or the 3. I actually feel eventually, and I've written this for a year now, I think Hayward down the road will end up as the Jazz's shooting guard. That started to happen last year. It started to happen at times this year. And it's probably going to happen. And then all of a sudden, you're looking for a small forward, or Hayward can be your long-term 3, and you need to find a long-term 2, because Alec Burks, as good as he's looked this season, has a lot to do in terms of being a true NBA caliber starting shooting guard. So we're going to have to see it play out, but I don't think, and I haven't heard anybody in the Jazz say, and it's not on the list of the top 3 things right now the Jazz are looking at, that Millsap, Favors, and Jefferson are going to be the future of this team, especially when you consider that Millsap and Jefferson both will have expiring contracts next season. All right, more questions coming in. If the Jazz make the playoffs, and I don't want to miss anybody here, but this is coming from Justin. If the Jazz make the playoffs, what do you think they have a better chance against, Spurs or Thunder? Yeah, that's a hard question. Neither. I would not put it past the Jazz. If they're playing the Spurs and Thunder to win 2 games at home in the playoffs, the Jazz would be, could be a dangerous team. But the injuries are a situation right now. The Thunder they're just deep. They're going to be so tough to beat at home. And even though the Jazz beat the Thunder at ESA not too long ago and is one of Utah's best wins of the season, that's just going to be really hard for the Jazz to beat the Thunder in a series. And same thing for the Spurs. The Jazz match up worse against the Spurs, I think, than the Thunder. I think the Jazz could take the Thunder maybe 4-2. Spurs maybe 4-2, but it would be a better 4-2 against the Thunder. And unfortunately, I don't think the Jazz match up well against either team just because of the point guard situation, the outside shooting, and the depth and the speed of all those teams. All right, comment comes in for Jeff. Are you a fan of the Jazz or just a beat writer? I'm a beat writer, and I like the Utah Jazz. I like the guys on the team. I like the people in the organization. I like the PR staff. I like the fans. I like everything. But there's a fine line, and it's it's a good question. And I could talk about it for a long time, but especially in this market, it's kind of an interesting situation to where you have a lot of people who are from Utah or they moved to Utah. The Jazz, along with RSL, are the only game in town. You have Utah. This is going to be funny. No, thank you.
Housekeeping?
No, thank you.
No service?
No service.
Okay.
That was pretty funny. That was some live chatting. That was housekeeping wanting to clean up my hotel room, but it's totally clean. But you have BYU, you have Utah. I mean, it's a very, very passionate sports fan base, and I think some of the people in radio and TV, and nothing wrong with it, but they grow up around the team and they love the team. A, I'm not from here. B, most importantly, a good, true beat writer, you got to draw the line. You can't be a fan of the team. You can, I don't want to say enjoy it. You can understand how exciting it is, and man, it can be really exciting when you see someone like Gordon Hayward or Derek Favors develop, or you see Paul Millsap does what he does, or I just saw the Tribune's comment with the LOL. You see Al Jefferson develop, or Tyrone Corbin find his way, or Kevin O'Connor make a good move. But I tend to document that stuff, and honestly, if the Jazz beat Miami right at home, I don't get excited. I'm not happy. If the Jazz lose to New Orleans and against the Hornets, what was it, 6 weeks ago, worst loss of the season, I don't get sad though. It's just you kind of like a player, you kind of find that middle line and you just document and you observe and you write. And I love my job. I'm really, really, really passionate about my job. And it's an honor to do it, and I love the Jazz fans and the Tribune readers because they're so passionate and they're so knowledgeable and unquestionably one of the best fan bases in pro sports, if not all of sports. But I'm not a fan of the Jazz, and technically I shouldn't be, and if I was, A, I wouldn't be doing my job right, and B, the Tribune should probably give me a call. Good question, though. Comment coming in from Danger. Danger. Do you think we are being ridiculous not having Karl Malone mentor Derek Favors? I'm gonna always be honest with you guys. I don't think that the Jazz are being ridiculous not having Karl Malone mentor Derek Favors. I do think the Jazz still need to at some point look into getting a big man coach. Michael Sanders has done a nice job. The players say nice things about him. The people around the organization say good things about him. He's a good guy. He played in the league a long time. He's coached in different situations. But I'm still not sure, and I'm going to write about this not too far down the road in the Tribune. But I'm still not sure if Favors and Cantor are taking exactly the next steps they need to in their evolution. This summer is going to be big for both of these guys, especially Enes Kanter. I'll say this. I don't think it would hurt at all to add a Patrick Ewing type of guy, Karl Malone type of guy to this team to help continue to push Derek Favors and Enes Kanter. One of the downsides is we get to kind of observe practice, but it's the start, and it's better than nothing. But we don't really get to see a practice situation, a post-practice situation, where Michael Sanders works intricately with Derek Favors and Enes Kanter. So after relying on things I hear from outside the team, inside the team, on and on, nobody said anything bad, and it's not a knock on Sanders at all. But it's more, do you want at some point, if you're this organization, hire somebody who was a true dominant big man in this league or a dominant big man coach? The Jazz haven't done that yet. They might do it in the future. Things can always change, but thus far it hasn't happened. And I do think it's been an interesting move for the Jazz. At the same time, Favors is making progress. Cantor's making progress. So obviously they and Michael Sanders are doing something right. Comment comes from Scott. What was Brian's take on the Derek Favors question about if he thinks the Jazz organization sees a long-term solution at power forward? It's interesting. I think there's no doubt that Derek Favors will be the Jazz's power forward long term. I don't see how he's not right now, and I think some of that stuff that comes out from other people, they have the right to do this as much, to say whatever they want to say. But if you just look at facts alone, number 3 pick, continued to develop. He's never complained. He's good in the locker room. He works his butt off. He still has a long way to go. He still has a long way to refine that game. But until the Jazz add somebody new at power forward, especially when their guy, Paul Millsap, great player, is undersized and has limitations at that position, I don't know who their long-term solution is at power forward without it being Derek Favors. Now, if they, in the draft another power forward, then things get really crazy out of nowhere. But right now, if you're looking at this team with what we know, facts are facts, Derek Favors is their answer at power forward. All right. My managing editor just weighed in with a comment. That's even funnier. All right, 13 minutes to go. I tell you what, I don't know if the Tribune will cut this off or if it's going to automatically cut off, but this is going really well. I don't know how many comments are waiting. I can only see kind of what comes up. And we'll fine-tune this as we go down the road, but and I'll figure this out. But if you're like, if you've had a question in for 30 minutes and haven't answered it, come back next week and I'll get to it, or you can email me, bsmith@sltrib.com, Twitter @TribJazz. I'm on Facebook, Google. I'm basically everywhere. So just shoot me an email, send me a Twitter reply, and I'll get your question if I don't get it during this chat, and come back next Friday. Coming from One to Beam Up, Star Trek. Keep hearing the Jazz. I've always liked Amare. Carroll, what is it about him KOC is liked? What did they see in him? Good question. Junkyard dog, athletic, he's physical, he shoots well, he's long. He is a Jazz type of player. And he's really like a classic Kevin O'Connor pickup if you think about it. Cast off of 3 teams, former first-round pick. He's got that late second-round steal written all over him, and that Paul Millsap type of guy who isn't perfect. There's not one thing that DeMarre Carroll does great, and that's, unfortunately, and that's just how the NBA works. You need a specialty if you're not a star player. He does about 5 to 7 things well, and when he's energized, when he's confident, when he's motivated, which he was struggling for a while there. Honestly, if you go back to about 2 weeks ago when Damari was playing, he just didn't look that great. He's been a completely changed player since the at San Antonio game 3 games ago. I love what Damari's bringing, and he's kind of everything that the Jazz do. I mean, Damari Carroll is Jazz basketball. All right, comment from another guest. Would the Jazz be better off for the long term if they don't make the playoffs this year? It's a great question. It's really hard to answer because we don't know how it's going to work out right now with Golden State's pick. If I'm the Utah Jazz, I want to pick in this draft. I think this draft 6 months ago was kind of overrated, where people are saying it's going to be the best draft in 10 years. Now you're hearing some of the experts kind of weigh in and say, it's good, but it's not as great as it looked just 6 months ago. It's still a good draft. It's a better draft than this last year's draft was. I mean, when you've got guys like Jared Sullinger, Anthony Davis, I mean, you just go, Damian Lillard, you just go down that list, 1 through about 15. I saw Chad Ford, who, from ESPN recently, talking about it. I mean, you're going to have a couple, 2 to 3 All-Stars in this draft. I would totally agree with that. You're going to have starters. If you've got Devin Harris, Paul Millsap, I say this so many times, but Devin Harris, Paul Millsap, Al Jefferson, Raja Bell, after this summer, expiring contracts, you need to continue to add players. And I think the Jazz right now are set at small forward and or shooting guard with Gordon Hayward. That still hasn't been determined what he'll be long-term for this team. I think that they should be set at power forward with Derek Favors. I think if Enes Kanter continues to develop, he's their starting 5. So you've at least got your 2 or 3, your 4 and your 5 locked in. You don't have your point guard, and you don't right now have your shooting guard. I think right now, if I'm projecting Alec Burks, he's a really good backup 2 and could be a starting 2. He's just got to improve that shot. He's 20 years old. He has time to work on it. So the Jazz at least have 2 more pieces to lock in terms of their starting 5. Now you can add that, I've talked about this earlier, you can add that through free agency, you can add that through a trade, but they've got to do it somehow, and it's just much cheaper and easier, although you're really rolling the dice and hoping you get lucky at the same time to add it through the draft, especially if you're a small market team. And the other thing to mention, Kevin O'Connor, I mean, you look at his track record the last few years. He's done very, very, very well, and as have the Jazz. All right, it's pulling up that we have 3 more final questions, so I'll answer them, and as long as they're rolling in, I'll keep going until about 15 after, 10 after, but I'm not exactly sure how it's going to work with the Tribune's live chat. And again, it's gone really well, at least from my end. It's been fun. It's been cool. It's streamed in really well. I have no idea what I look like or sound like because I can't see it right now, so it's a little weird. But we'll kind of fine-tune everything this week and then, be totally professional and smooth next week. Professionalism is our middle name. That's a music reference. If anyone gets it, email me. Comment from Jeremy. If it is so obvious that we have to get rid of one of our bigs, why would the Jazz not sell while the price is high and try to bring in a top point guard? And don't tell me that Devin Harris is the guy. Right now, Devin Harris is the guy. I'm not at all telling you Devin Harris is the guy 2 years from now. He's still got a year left. Devin has taken, a step forward without question since the season started. He's still up and down. I mean, honestly, you look at it, Devin didn't play well at San Antonio when the Jazz lost that game. Tony Parker owned him. He played great. He played well against, I think it was Golden State, and he played great during the non-Big 3 game at ESA with Parker, Ginobili, and Duncan out. And then, 5 fouls, just pretty much non-existent against the Houston game, which somehow the Rockets never recognized, and Jamal Tinsley closed that game. So Devin Harris, he either completely goes off or you're getting about 10 points and 4 assists, which isn't exactly what you need moving forward. I think Devin, if I'm grading him right now off the top of my head, I'd give him a B- this season or maybe a C+. I think Devin deserves more credit than he's gotten. He's come a long way since the start of the season, but, there's no way around it. He's not your guy long term. He's only getting older. He's going to have an expiring deal next year. So to kind of answer the first part of that question, if it's so obvious that we have to get rid of one of our bigs, why don't we sell high? That's a great question, and that's why going into the trade deadline, I continued to say that the Jazz, here's the deal. I mean, they could move Millsap and Jefferson. They could have moved them before the trade deadline. They could have moved them before the season, but they can move them before the draft, and they can move them, at any point before next season starts, and the value is still going to be just as high. And I think for Jefferson, it becomes even higher because all of a sudden that it wasn't a Karolinko contract, but it was a massive contract. He makes about $14 to $15 million a year. That's expiring next season. If you're getting an expiring contract from somebody who's going to average 19 points and 9 rebounds a game, who's almost always healthy, who's improved his passing, who at least tries all the time on defense, that is a huge asset in the NBA. Now, I've said all along, I don't think Jefferson's your number one. Minnesota understood that. Jefferson is, your number 2 at best, and you're a strong team if Al Jefferson's your number 3 offensive option. He's the Jazz's number 1 offensive option. He's their highest paid player. He makes $14 million a year. So I think it's a great point from Jeremy. At some point, you've got to sell high. I mean, the last thing you want to do, in most teams at least, is just let these guys walk with nothing to show for it, and that's why I continue to bring up, at some point, I think they will move either Jefferson or Millsap. It's just a matter of when. Comment comes in from C. Bill. If you were the GM, would you trade Jefferson or Millsap in the offseason? All right, I'm just going to have fun with this. Let's say I'm the GM of the Jazz, which I totally am not. I would trade one of them. I would not trade both. I would not trade Al Jefferson at this point. And that isn't because I like Jefferson more. That's not because of anything that it doesn't sound like. That's because I feel like when I talk to people, when I watch things, when I report, Derek Favors can start for you. And if let's say theoretically the Jazz trade Millsap leading up into the draft, maybe they don't have a pick, but they want to move back into the draft, then you get a situation where you trade Millsap. All right, you get back in the draft. You can draft a point guard. You can draft a shooting guard, whatever you want. You can trade for another player, another team. But Derek Favors knows going into the summer, going into a long summer, which we didn't have in the lockout, he's your starting power forward. And he works on certain things, and he can work out without Jefferson. The reason I don't say Jefferson is, A, you can still trade him before the trade deadline. $14 million, $15 million a year, that is a huge trade piece. Right before that, you still have the trade exception, which is, those are a lot of really great pieces to package together. You could package Al Jefferson with Raja Bell or Devin Harris or whatever you want to do. I mean, it's mix and match because we're talking in hypotheticals here. But point being, I don't think Enes Kanter right now is at all ready to be a starting center in the NBA. Not a knock on Kanter. It's just you don't want to do that to Enes Kanter. You want to let him develop. Let him do what Derek Favors did. Let him play for one more year, back up, pick things up, work his butt off during the summer, continue to improve and refine his game, and then he's ready to go. And then, if we're playing cards, you could trade Jefferson before the trade deadline or whatever you want to do, and then you're selling high. Then you're maximizing your pieces, and you're not hurting your team in the short term. We'll see what Kevin O'Connor does. Again, as fascinating as this season has been and the playoff run and how this team's come together and stuck together and the old blending with the new, all this stuff, I still think we haven't even begun to see where this team's going and what this organization is to do, because you start looking at their salary cap situation, who's going to be available as a free agent, the development of Favors, Hayward, Kanter, Burks, who's not under contract. It's very unpredictable for this team in a good way over the next 2 years. Comment from Daria: would you rather be the beat writer for Portland? It doesn't matter. It's complicated because there are different media. There are different papers in Portland, so they don't just have one beat writer. Honestly, there are 30 NBA teams. There's also Major League Baseball, and there's the NFL. Not my dream, but my goal about 3 or 4 years ago was to be a professional beat writer. I'm a professional beat writer. I have an awesome job that I worked really hard to get. I like the city of Portland a lot. I like Salt Lake. I lived in Portland for 9 years total. I've lived in Salt Lake for about 2 years. There's a lot of things about Salt Lake that I like. I love the Salt Lake Tribune, and I'm not just saying that. It's a really great paper, and I work with great people. I intentionally moved to Salt Lake City to cover the Utah Jazz. I could have stayed in Portland to cover the Blazers, but I was given the opportunity with this job to be a full-time traveling beat writer. Emphasis on traveling. That's usually the separation for. So this is a little bit of insider beat writing, but most beat writers don't travel. It's really rare when a beat writer does, and usually it's 1 to 2 for every team anymore. And there aren't many traveling beat writers, whether it's Major League Baseball, the NFL, NBA, or even hockey anymore. And it's a hard job to get, and I do it to the best of my ability. So it doesn't really matter for me if it's in Salt Lake or Portland or New York City or Sacramento or San Antonio or Chicago. There are all these other variables involved in terms of the team and on and on. And honestly, I would rather be covering the Jazz right now than the Blazers in terms of, that's the thing. It's hard to explain, but as a beat writer, you really get into the future of the team and the development and the organization. And the Blazers, believe it or not, are well run on certain avenues. And before Nate McMillan was fired, I had a really good relationship with him, and really always liked Brandon Roy and LaMarcus Aldridge and a lot of guys on that team. But the Blazers have changed a lot. A lot of NBA teams changed a lot. The Jazz, you look at Kevin O'Connor, the organization, the players, on and on and on. It's a really interesting era for this team right now, and I talked to a lot of my writer friends. They're kind of jealous that I get to cover the Utah Jazz because of where this team has been, where it's going, all the things that are on the table right now. So, I really, really like covering the Jazz, and if you gave me an option right now, I would rather cover the Jazz than the Blazers. Another comment from Danger. If Gordon is our shooting guard, then what is Alec Burks long term? I think you're going to have to find that out. I love Alec Burks. I mean, I built the Alec Burks bandwagon, jokingly. But, when I talk to people, I don't know anybody that's convinced right now Alec Burks is the Jazz's future starting two. He could evolve into that. He could also be a heck of a sixth man, a seventh man, a 20-minute guy. He's just got to develop his outside shot. He's got to get to the point where he is a dynamic, consistent offensive player. Right now, a lot of his game is based off slashing, getting to the basket, free throws, and it's hard to get that if you're starting two and you're going up against Dwayne Wade or you're going up against Kobe Bryant. I love Alec Burks. He's just got to continue to develop. Right now, if your feet on the ground looking at it, you can't say, when I talk to people around the team, the organization outside of the Jazz, that he is the Jazz's future starting two. We have to see that develop. Comment from C. Bill. Do you think the Jazz will sign Paul Millsap to an extension? Great question. That is going to be an issue this summer. I don't know right now. I need to kind of talk to more Jazz people, and obviously we're kind of focusing on the playoffs right now and where this team's at, but it's going to be an issue this season. I'm all for it, and I know certain people would be all for it who matter if it works out and if the money is right and the pieces are right. But, I mean, if you just take a step back, and I think anybody who's doing this chat, obviously you guys are awesome and you're hardcore fans, and it's great. The questions have been awesome, but I think we all know that it's hard, especially if you're the Jazz, to sign somebody to what Paul Millsap's going to want, which will probably be somewhere around 4 to 5 years, $10 to $12 million a year, and he deserves that. We got 29 other teams in the NBA. Everybody in this league would love to have Paul Millsap on their team, but when you've got Derek Favors there, when you've got Enes Kanter there, it's hard to make it work, not just for 1 year, but for 4 or 5 years. And so we're just going to see this thing play out. I think it's going to be on the table. I think it will be an issue. I don't think it's going away at all, and that's why I continue to talk about this. As great as things are now, it's going to be a situation where we're just going to have to watch this play out, because it's very hard to say right now definitively, yes, Paul Millsap will be on the Jazz at the start of the 2012-13 season, or at the end, more importantly, of the 2012-2013 season. Comment from Justin. What do we do now if we get Golden State's pick? Is it determined before or after the lottery? A, it depends on how Golden State finishes, but B, most importantly, end all, it's determined after the lottery. So if Golden State has the 1 through 7 pick, they keep it. If they don't, it goes to the Jazz. All right, so I think we're going to do one more question. I've gone over my time, but the stuff's been great. And I said this again. You can follow me Twitter at TribJazz. Thank you to everybody who follows. It's really awesome and an honor. I have a Facebook account. I believe it's facebook.com. TribJazz. I have a Google Plus account. Email is bsmith@sltrib.com. If you submitted a question or if there's like 100 piled up and I didn't get to it, it wasn't intentional. I apologize. I could only see stuff as it rolled down. It seemed like this went pretty smooth, but it was our first time doing it. We'll tweak it and improve it, and we're going to continue to do this thing as long as the season goes on. We'll do it before the draft. We'll do it for free agency, and then we'll really kick it in when it's not a lockout shortened season and the travel isn't as crazy, and this is going to be a continual thing. So we'll refine this, but from my perspective, not being able to see myself or hear myself or have any idea if it's going well or bad, it was fun. It was really cool. And I'll also do Twitter chats from time to time from here on out. So this is just the start of all this stuff, and everybody's been awesome. So thank you very much. All right, so last question from Guest. Is Guest the same person, or is there like 10 people? Will the Jazz go after a point guard in next year's draft? Aren't Devin Harris, Jamal Tinsley, and Earl Watson under contract next year? Who's the point guard of the future? 3 questions, all really good. Number 1, will the Jazz go after a point guard in next year's draft? I've said this before. We're going to have to wait to see, A, do the Jazz have picks in the first round? They could still draft somebody in the second round. You know, I mean, you can find people, but I think everybody knows who follows the Jazz right now. I mean, they need a point guard. Jamal Tinsley has been great. Earl Watson has been great, really good. Devin Harris at times has been really, really good. But Harris, after this summer, will have an expiring deal. He's still going to play 4, 5, 6 more years in the league. Just kind of estimating right now. But, I mean, you know, I would say Devin Harris will command 3 years, $20 million, 4 years at $32 million. I mean, you know, Devin Harris is in that $6 to $8 million range. That's where he's basically at right now. He's a proven commodity in this league, has been in the NBA Finals. You know, I mean, Devin Harris is still a starter in this league. It just depends on the right situation. People have said all season around Devin Harris, within the Jazz, outside the Jazz, he would probably be a better player, big picture, on another team. He's had to make it work with the Jazz, and we've seen Devin Harris continue to evolve and make it work with the Utah Jazz, and Devin deserves credit. It wasn't an ideal situation. He didn't ask to come here. He was traded here. The system doesn't really fit him. Everyone from him to Ty Corbin to Paul Millsap and Al Jefferson and Gordon Hayward have done a nice job, long-term, big picture, you know, adapting the Jazz's system to Harris, and Harris adapting himself to the Jazz. But we also all know, I mean, he's 99% not the long-term fit. Earl Watson has another year left, but Earl will be 33, 34 next year. Earl is not a starter in this league. Earl is a really nice backup, and he's a great asset, but he's not a starter, so he's not your long-term answer. Jamal Tinsley, I've been told, has a contract that is structured a little differently, but basically he is on the Jazz through Summer League, which means he, to the best of my knowledge, would become a free agent after this season. I don't know if there's an option situation or what. It's never been fully explained. I'll actually research that more when I have a little time. And it's a little more relevant. I mean, right now we're focusing on the playoffs. But, you know, Jamal Tinsley, he's been amazing. But Jamal Tinsley is actually proven he can still start in this league. But, you know, he's not your point guard of the future. I mean, at best, he is your backup. And he's a really good backup. He can start in spot situations. But, I mean, you know, if you're going to win a championship, you need a Chris Paul or Russell Westbrook or Tony Parker, or if not somebody who's a annual All-Star. More importantly, you just need somebody who's young, who you can develop, who can mesh with Burks, Hayward, Favors, Cantor. So we don't know yet. I mean, the Jazz might trade for somebody. They might, you know, go after somebody who's been in the league for 2 or 3 years and they think they can kind of mold and they haven't hit their potential yet. They may not have a draft pick after the Golden State situation and the Jazz's playoff situation in Minnesota, and they may trade a Devin Harris or Bell or Millsap or Jefferson or do some type of package to move up in the draft and draft a point guard. We're just going to have to see this thing play out, but it's going to be really interesting, and much like the Millsap and Jefferson situation with their contracts, I think if you're looking, top 3 things to watch with the Jazz moving forward is how do they handle the point guard situation. All right, so there are no more questions coming down. I've gone 10 minutes past my time. This was a lot of fun. Thank you very much. We'll be even better if we were horrible this week, and we'll be back, and we'll continue to do this. Twitter @TribJazz, Facebook, Facebook.com TribJazz. We're on Google+. I don't know how it works with Google Plus for linking it because they don't do individual accounts or whatever, but I'm on there. I'm sure you could Google it. SLTrib.com. Jazz play the Hornets tonight, so I'll be back at the arena in about 3 hours, and this was a lot of fun. Thank you very much, and I will talk to you guys soon. All right, have a good day. Bye.